Hello, everyone. We look at the ocean and see a canvas of breathtaking beauty, a source of life, a highway for trade and discovery. But the sea has another face, a darker face. For sailors, for those who truly know its depths, it is a realm of unimaginable power, profound mystery, and sometimes absolute terror. It is a place where the line between the living and the dead can blur, where a man's promise can echo for eternity, and where a single moment of defiance can lead to a curse that outlasts empires. What happens when a ship never makes port? Not because it sank, but because it's forbidden to. What happens when its crew is doomed to sail forever, becoming a ghostly omen of disaster for all who cross its path? We've all heard the stories, the maritime folklore, the whispers of ghost ships, but one name stands above them all, a name that has struck fear into the hearts of sailors for over 300 years, the Flying Dutchman. For most, it is just a story, a work of fiction popularized by movies and operas. But what if I told you the sightings have never stopped? That credible witnesses, from princes to seasoned naval officers, have logged official reports of seeing a spectral 17th-century vessel glowing with an eerie light, sailing against impossible winds, only to vanish into thin air. The legend isn't just a myth. It is a scar on maritime history, and tonight we peel back the layers of time, salt, and fear to uncover the terrifying truth behind the world's most infamous ghost ship. This is the story of a captain's damnation, an eternal voyage, and the chilling question of whether a spectral ship and its tormented crew are still out there, sailing the lonely watches of the night. It all begins in the 17th century, the golden age of sail, a time of immense wealth, ruthless ambition, and burgeoning empires. The Dutch East India Company was the titan of the seas, its ships crisscrossing the globe, bringing back spices, silks, and unimaginable riches from the Far East. To captain one of these vessels was to be a king in your own right, and there was no captain more renowned, more skilled, or more terrifyingly ambitious than Hendrik van der Decken. Van der Decken was not a simple man. He was a master mariner, a genius of wind and sail. He could read the ocean like a book, navigate by stars that others couldn't find, and push his ship and crew to speeds that seemed impossible. His vessel, the Fay Amsterdam Fay, though often called the Flying Dutchman, Fay in the Tales, was his pride, a masterpiece of naval architecture, fast and formidable. But for all his brilliance, Van der Decken was a man consumed by a ravenous pride. He saw nature not as a force to be respected, but as an adversary to be conquered. He saw rules both of man and of God as mere suggestions. His crew respected his skill but feared his temper. He was known to be a hard man, a blasphemer who would mock the heavens in a calm and curse them in a storm. His one obsession was speed, efficiency, the record-breaking passage. Profit and glory were his twin gods, and he would sacrifice anything, or anyone, at their altar. In 1641, his voyage began like any other. Laden with treasures from the Orient, he set sail from Batavia, now Jakarta. For Amsterdam the journey was long and perilous, but one obstacle was feared above all others, the Cape of Good Hope. They called it the Cape of Storms, and for good reason. It's where the cold Atlantic and the warm Indian Ocean collide in a perpetual war of currents and winds, creating some of the most treacherous waters on. For centuries, this cape was a graveyard for ships, a place where the sea could swallow a vessel whole without a moment's notice. As Van der Decken approached the cape, the sky, once a brilliant blue, began to curdle into a sickly, bruised purple. The air grew heavy, thick with an unspoken dread. The sea, moments before placid, began to heave and swell, its surface turning to a chaos of churning. This was no ordinary storm. This was the Cape's fury unleashed. The wind shrieked through the rigging like a banshee, tearing at the sails. Waves the size of liquid mountains crashed over the bow, sweeping across the deck, threatening to drag men into the raging abyss. The ship groaned, its timbers screaming in protest against the relentless assault. The crew, hardened sailors who had faced death 100 times, were terrified. They pleaded with their captain, "Turn back, Captain. We must seek shelter. No ship can survive this." They begged, their faces pale with fear. They saw this storm as a divine warning, a message from God to turn back. But Van der Decken was not a man who heeded warnings. He stood on the quarterdeck, legs braced against the violent lurching of the ship, his face lashed by rain and sea spray, and he laughed. He saw not a warning, but a challenge. He saw the ocean itself daring him, and his pride, his colossal, blasphemous arrogance, would not allow him to back down. Shelter, turning back is for cowards. He roared over the howling gale. I made a promise to be in Amsterdam by Pentecost, and I will not be delayed by a little weather. His first mate, a pious and respected man, approached him, his voice trembling but firm. Captain, this is madness, this is God's wrath. Do not tempt fate. For his counsel, the first mate was met with a pistol, Van der Decken, his eyes wild with a feverish light. The crew watched in horror. Their captain had not just gone mad, he had committed murder. Mutiny began to stir in their hearts. They saw now that their captain would lead them all to a watery grave as a group of sailors rushed him, intending to seize control of the ship. Van der Decken fired his pistol into their ranks, his voice a thunderous bellow that seemed to challenge the storm itself. He climbed onto the ship's railing, raising a fist to the black, roiling sky, and he made his fateful oath. The exact words are lost to legend, but the sentiment echoes through eternity. I will round this cape, he screamed into the heart of the storm, even if I have to sail until Judgment Day. And in that moment, something changed. The storm seemed to pause, the wind holding its breath. According to the legend, a ghostly light pierced the clouds, illuminating the deck with an unnatural, sickly glow. A figure appeared on the bow. Some say it was the devil himself. Others, a spectral form of divine judgment. The entity offered Van der Decken a choice, a devil's bargain. He could try to round the cape and likely sink, finding peace in death. Or he could accept the challenge and become a specter of the sea, an eternal torment to all sailors. Van der Decken, consumed by his hubris, made his choice without hesitation. I accept, he cried. I will sail forever. The curse was sealed. The ship was no longer a vessel of wood and canvas, but they became trapped, doomed to an eternal voyage, forever battling the storm off the Cape of Good Hope, never able to round it, never able to make port. They were the Flying Dutchman, a ghost ship sailing for eternity, and with their damnation came a new, terrible purpose. They became an omen. To see the Flying Dutchman was to see your own doom. Any ship that sighted the ghostly vessel was said to be cursed with misfortune, destined for wreck and ruin. The crew of the Dutchman, in their endless torment, would sometimes try to make contact with the living. They would hail passing ships, trying to pass on letters to loved ones long dead, letters from a crew that no longer existed in the world of men. But these letters were themselves cursed. The legend of the Flying Dutchman was born in that moment of blasphemy, a story spun from the very real dangers of the sea and the human capacity for pride and defiance. It became a cautionary tale whispered in taverns from Amsterdam to Batavia, a story to scare young sailors into respecting the power of God and the ocean. For 2 centuries, it remained just that, a story, a chilling piece of folklore. And they weren't just telling tales, they were writing it down in official ship's logs. The legend was about to sail out of the realm of myth and into the pages of recorded history. One of the most compelling and famous sightings occurred on the 11th of July, 1881. The witness was no ordinary superstitious sailor. He was a 16-year-old midshipman, but he was also a prince, destined to one day become king. He was serving aboard the HMS Faber-Chante as part of a 3-year world tour with his elder brother, Prince Albert Victor. In the early hours of the morning, as the Faber-Chante sailed through the waters between Melbourne and Sydney, Australia, the young prince was on watch. The night was clear. The sea calmed suddenly. The lookout on the forecastle shouted, his voice strained with a mixture of confusion and alarm, but it was like no ship they had ever seen. Prince George himself saw it, along with 12 other members of the crew. He recorded the chilling event in his official diary. At 4 a.m., he wrote, "The Flying Dutchman crossed our bows, a strange red light as of a phantom ship all aglow. in the midst of which light the masts, spars, and sails of a brig 200 yards distant stood out in strong relief as she came up on the port bow. The quarterdeck midshipmen saw it. They were all seasoned naval men, not prone to flights of fancy. They observed the vessel for several minutes. It was clear, distinct, and utterly surreal. The glow it emitted was not from any lantern. It seemed to emanate from the very fabric of the ship itself. It was sailing fast, yet there was no wind. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, it vanished. There was nothing. They searched the horizon, but the sea was bare. There was no trace of the vessel, no wreckage, no lights, nothing. It had simply ceased to exist. The encounter was unsettling enough, but the legend of the Flying Dutchman is a legend of doom. It is an omen, and the curse must be fulfilled. Later that day, the sailor who had first spotted the phantom ship was sent up the rigging to work on the topgallant mast. But as he reached the highest point, he lost his footing and fell. He plummeted to the deck and was, as Prince George recorded in his diary, smashed to atoms. The curse had claimed its victim, the Admiral of the Fleet, a man named Lord Clanwilliam, also died of illness not long after the sighting. Coincidence, perhaps, but for the crew of the HMS Faber-Chante Fay, the connection was undeniable. They had seen the Dutchman, and it had brought death aboard their ship. The prince's testimony gave the legend a weight it had never had before. This was not a drunken sailor's yarn. This was the recorded account of a future monarch of the British Empire, corroborated by a dozen naval personnel. It became a global sensation. The Flying Dutchman was no longer just a ghost story. It was a phenomenon. As technology advanced, the witnesses became, if anything, more credible. During the Second World War, a conflict defined by steel, sonar, and radar, the ancient phantom continued to make its presence known. In 1939, as war clouds gathered over Europe, dozens of beachgoers at Glencairn Beach, just outside Cape Town, South Africa, became witnesses to one of the most... On a clear afternoon, they watched in disbelief as a fully rigged 17th-century merchant ship with tattered sails moved silently and gracefully into False Bay. It sailed with purpose, heading towards the shore, yet there was no wind to fill its sails. The crowd watched, mesmerized and confused. For over an hour, it was a solid, three-dimensional object. Not a fleeting glimpse people point... Was it a movie being filmed? A historical replica? But there were no cameras, no support boats. Then, as the sun began to set, the ship began to dissolve. It faded like a mist, its form becoming transparent until... Finally, it was gone completely. The event was reported in local newspapers, with dozens of witnesses confirming the same impossible details. An ancient ship had appeared from nowhere. The cold, tense world of submarine warfare seems an unlikely place for a ghost story, yet the Dutchman was sighted there too. German U-boat crews, including those under the command of the future Grand Admiral Karl defiant, logged encounters with a mysterious sailing vessel in the North Atlantic. These were men of iron discipline, trained to identify any ship on the horizon with cold precision. Yet they reported seeing a spectral brig, glowing with an eerie light, sailing where no such ship should be, often in the midst of terrible storms, a silent, ghostly sentinel in the war-torn ocean. In 1942, off the coast of Cape Town, 4 British sailors from the submarine HMS Fay were on deck, taking a break when they saw an old wooden ship appear out of... They called to their commander, who came to the bridge and watched the vessel through his binoculars. He described it as a schooner, but an ancient one. Something out of another time as they watched. It simply vanished before their eyes. The commander, a man not given to superstition, was so shaken that he ordered the submarine to dive immediately. He recorded the event in his log, concluding with a simple, chilling statement. Are all these witnesses, from princes and admirals to ordinary beachgoers and hardened submariners, all lying? Are they all mad? Or could there be a rational, scientific explanation for these centuries of consistent, terrifying sightings? Skeptics and scientists, quite reasonably, argue that there is. The ocean is a place of powerful illusions, and the most likely culprit behind the legend of the Flying Dutchman is a natural phenomenon known as a fata morgana. A fata morgana is not a simple mirage like the shimmering pools of water you see on a hot road. It is a superior mirage, an incredibly complex optical illusion caused by a specific atmospheric condition called a temperature inversion. Light rays passing through these layers are bent and distorted in extreme ways. This can make objects that are far below the horizon, like a ship miles away, appear to be floating in the air. The image can be stretched, compressed, inverted, and stacked on top of itself, creating bizarre and fantastical shapes. A distant, ordinary fishing boat could be transformed by a fata morgana into a towering. The ship could appear to float high above the water, hence the name Flying Dutchman. The shimmering, indistinct quality of the mirage would give it a ghostly, ethereal appearance. The sudden vanishing act is also easily explained. As atmospheric conditions change, or as the real ship sails out of the mirage-producing zone, the illusion would simply disappear, seeming to vanish into thin air. Elmo's fire could explain the ghostly glow. This is a weather phenomenon in which plasma is created in a strong electric field, like that found in a thunderstorm. It can cause the tips of ships' masts and spars to glow with a bright, eerie blue or violet light. To a terrified sailor in the 17th century, this would undoubtedly look like a supernatural manifestation, a sign of a cursed or... Imagine being a sailor hundreds of years ago. You're on a voyage that lasts for months, even years. You live in cramped, unsanitary conditions. Your diet is poor, often leading to diseases like scurvy, which was known to cause hallucinations. You are isolated, surrounded by the vast, monotonous, and often terrifying emptiness of the ocean. You are steeped in superstition. Every creak of the ship's timbers. In this state of physical and mental stress, it is easy to see how a sailor could mistake a distant ship in a mirage or a strange light on the mast for something supernatural. The mind, desperate for meaning, would connect these strange sights to the prevailing folklore. The story of the damned Captain Van der Decken. The story itself acts as a powerful psychological primer. Once you've heard the tale of the Flying Dutchman, you are more likely to interpret an ambiguous sight as being that very ship. The legend primes the mind to see what it expects or fears, to see these explanations are logical. They are scientific, and they almost certainly account for many, if not most, of the reported sightings. A fata morgana, combined with St. Elmo's fire and the psychological state of sailors, provides a compelling, rational framework for understanding the birth and persistence of the legend. But does it explain everything? Does it explain the consistency of the sightings across different eras and cultures? Witnesses consistently describe a 17th-century-style vessel. A fata morgana distorts what is there. It doesn't create a specific... How could a 19th-century prince and a 20th-century submarine crew both see a ship that looked like it belonged in the 1600s? And what about the curse? The bad luck that seems to follow a sighting. The sailor on Prince George's ship falling from the mast, the repeated accounts of storms and disasters befalling ships shortly after an encounter. Are these all just coincidences? It's a statistical certainty. Is it just that when an accident happens, fay after fay a strange sighting, we create a causal link that doesn't exist? This is where belief and skepticism collide. Science gives us a plausible explanation, but it doesn't entirely erase the chilling. What if it is more than just a trick of the light? This lingering doubt, this possibility of a supernatural truth, is what gives... But the legend of the Flying Dutchman is more than just a horror story or a scientific curiosity. At its heart, it is a tragedy. A story of a man whose pride cost him his soul, and like all great tragedies, it contains a flicker of hope, a possibility of redemption. This part of the myth, often forgotten, is perhaps the most human. The curse, it is said, is not unbreakable. He is given a single chance to find a woman who will love him and be faithful to him unto death. If he can find such a love pure and true enough to overcome the devil's curse, his soul will be redeemed, and he and his crew will finally find peace. This quest for salvation is the heart of the most famous artistic interpretation of the legend, Richard Wagner's opera, Der Fliegende Fender, or The Flying... Wagner himself, a sailor who endured a terrifyingly stormy sea voyage, became obsessed with the legend. His opera, first performed in 1843, transform the story from a simple ghost tale into an epic romance of damnation and redemption. In Wagner's telling, the story centers on Senta, the daughter of a sea captain. She is a dreamer, a young woman. She has a portrait of the ghostly captain hanging in her home and spends her days staring at it, singing songs of his cursed fate. While other girls her age dream of marriage and a comfortable life, Senta dreams of saving the tormented soul of the Dutchman. She tells her friends that she will be the one to break his curse. They think she is mad, obsessed with a fantasy. Her suitor, Eric, pleads with her to forget this dark, but her fate, she feels, is intertwined with the ghostly captain's, as fate would have it. Her father's ship is caught in a storm and takes shelter in a bay. Another ship, a mysterious vessel with blood, red sails and a black mast, drops anchor nearby. Its captain comes ashore. It is, of course, the Dutchman, his 7 years up, beginning his desperate hope. Senta's father meets the stranger, who is laden with treasure, the cursed gold he has accumulated over centuries. The Dutchman offers his entire fortune in exchange for a place to stay, and upon hearing his host has a daughter, he asks for her hand in marriage. Senta's father, blinded by greed, readily agrees. When the Dutchman enters Senta's home, their eyes meet. He is world-weary. She looks at him and sees not a monster, but the man from the portrait, the soul she has sworn to save. He is stunned to find a woman who seems to know him, who looks at him not with fear, but with compassion. He asks her if she will accept him, warning her of the terrible fate that awaits those linked to him. She, without a moment's hesitation, pledges her undying faithfulness. For a brief, shining moment, the Dutchman feels a glimmer of salvation he has not felt in centuries. But the tragedy is not so easily averted, Eric. Senta's spurned suitor confronts her. He reminds her of her past promises to him, pleading with her to reconsider. The Dutchman overhears their conversation and misunderstands. He believes Senta is, like all the others before her, unfaithful. His hope shatters, convinced you are saved. Senta cries out to him, but he doesn't believe her. He returns to his ship, revealing his true identity to all. "They call me the Flying Dutchman," he declares, as his phantom crew prepares to set sail back into their eternal storm. He is resigned to his fate, believing salvation is impossible. But Senta will not let him go. To prove her faithfulness is absolute. To prove her vow is true even unto death. She runs to the edge of a cliff overlooking the sea. "Praise be to your angel, praise be to his law," she cries, and with those words she hurls herself into the raging waves below. It is the ultimate sacrifice, an act of pure, unconditional love, and it is enough. In that instant, the ghostly red-sailed ship, its purpose finally over, breaks apart and sinks beneath the waves. The long, tormented voyage is at an end, and from the wreckage, the transfigured souls of Senta and the Dutchman are seen ascending to heaven, finally united in peace. It is a beautiful, tragic, and powerful ending, but it is, of course, an opera. A work of art, the question for us, or is the curse unbroken? Is he still out there, once every 7 years, walking the earth in search of a love that can set him free? Is he still battling that eternal storm off the Cape of Good Hope? A chilling reminder of what happens when a man's pride wages war with the forces of God and nature. The legend of the Flying Dutchman endures because it speaks to something deep within us. It is a story about the awesome, terrifying power of the... It is a story about hubris and consequence, about how a single moment of defiance can have eternal repercussions. It is a story about loneliness, about the ultimate isolation of a soul cut off from humanity, from God, from home. And it is a story that refuses to die. The age of sail is long past. Our oceans are now charted by GPS, monitored by satellites, and crossed by enormous... We live in an age of science and reason, and yet the whispers continue. Even today, in the quiet watches of the night, modern sailors on the decks of supertankers and container ships sometimes see a strange light on the horizon. They see something that doesn't show up on radar. A ship with sails where no sailing ship should be. They see it, and a cold dread fills them, a primal fear passed down through generations of seafarers. A lingering echo of a powerful story, Or is it Captain Van der Decken and his ghostly crew, still sailing on their endless voyage, still trying to deliver their letters to the dead, still serving as a terrifying omen of doom? The truth, like the Dutchman himself, remains elusive, lost in the sea mist that hangs between fact and folklore, between the world we know and the dark, deep mysteries. So the next time you stand by the sea on a stormy night and you look out into the vast, dark expanse, listen to the wind, look closely at the horizon. You might just see a strange light. You might just see the silhouette of a ship with tattered sails battling against the storm, and you'll be faced with the same question that has haunted us for centuries. Is it just a trick of the light? Or have you just witnessed the eternal curse of the Flying Dutchman? If you like this video, please subscribe, like it, and support us. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.